They say the Harper name still hangs in the air down in Wilkinson County, like the ghost of tobacco smoke that never quite leaves the walls. I have heard that the old house still stands, though the porch has sunken into the clay and the magnolia trees have grown wild around it, swallowing the light. Perhaps it's fitting. The house always preferred the shade. It was built by men who feared the sun and all that it revealed. I'm one of the last who remembers what was done beneath that roof, and though my tongue trembles to form the words, silence has grown heavier than sin itself. My name is Elias Harper. I'm in my 87th year, though age no longer feels like a number, but a slow undoing, one thread at a time. My hands shake when I hold the pen, and my breath carries the scent of dust and decay. There was a time when the Lord's name came easily from my mouth. Now it feels like an intrusion. I speak tonight not for forgiveness. I have long since forfeited that hope, but because the truth has lingered in the walls for too long. It festers, and the house has grown sick with it. I remember the way the evening light once lay across the floorboards, turning every floor to gold. We thought ourselves a righteous family then, God-fearing, respectable, the kind that bowed before Scripture, even as we whispered to the bottle after supper. There was pride in our name, a kind of quiet cruelty too, the kind that passes from father to son like a curse sewn into the blood. My wife Mary used to hum while she worked, a soft tune from her girlhood, and our boys would follow the sound, laughing, filling the house with life. The laughter is what I miss most. It's what the silence mocks now. The year of our ruin came like a fever. The rain stopped. The cotton withered. The ledgers began to fill with red ink and the names of men I owed. They came first with letters, then with visits. I remember the smell of their boots, the polish and the sweat, the sound of their voices echoing across the porch. Men who spoke softly like they pitied me. That was the cruelest part. There are debts that cannot be paid with coin, and I learned too late that the Lord does not forgive those who try. Before I go further, if you wish to hear more of these forgotten confessions, stay with me, subscribe, and listen to the rest. I will not ask again. I haven't much breath left. It is strange what memory chooses to keep. I remember the cracks in the plaster above our bed, shaped like rivers branching from some distant source. I remember the smell of lamp oil, the sound of cicadas when the heat grew unbearable. And I remember Mary's eyes when she realized I had gone too far. The look she gave me that day has never left. It clings to me still, like the scent of smoke after the fire's gone out. There are men who speak of evil as something that comes from without, from the devil's whisper or the weakness of flesh. I do not believe that anymore. Evil grows slowly, like mold on damp wood, until you cannot tell what part was ever clean. It began with small compromises, a borrowed sum, a delayed payment, a lie told to keep peace at the table. Each one felt necessary, righteous even. Until the day came when necessity became hunger and hunger became sin. When I think back on those years before the debt collectors came, I see only faces. My boys Samuel and Thomas, both strong, both unbroken then. Samuel was 15, broad-shouldered and proud, always helping his mother before the fields called him away. Thomas was quieter, still with a child's softness in his voice. They were my joy, my blood, and my undoing. I sometimes wonder if they would have lived longer had they not been born under my name. The nights were the worst. The ledger lay open on the table like a holy book, rewritten by a vengeful God. I would stare at the numbers until they blurred, praying for a miracle that never came. Mary would light a candle by the window and whisper a hymn I could barely hear. The light flickered against the walls, trembling like her faith. I envied that light. It still reached for heaven, even as everything around it sank. I can still hear the voice of the first man who came to collect. His name was Benton, though it might as well have been Judas for all I remember. He spoke gently, smiling as though we were equals. I offered him whiskey. He refused. He told me the bank would soon call the note. I told him the Lord would provide. He smiled again, that quiet, patient smile of a man who has seen too many ruined men before me. I did not know then that he would return, and that his next visit would end with a bargain that would rot the soul from my bones. If I close my eyes now, I can see the light that fell across that man's face. It was late afternoon, and the dust from the road clung to his coat. Behind him, the horizon was red with dying sun. I remember thinking how easy it would have been to mistake him for an angel, if not for the brief flicker of pity in his eyes. I know now it wasn't pity at all. It was recognition. He had seen men like me before, men who believed they still had a choice. I did not. Benton returned 3 weeks later. The rain had not come, and the cane had begun to rot where it stood, its stalks bending under their own weight. The air smelled of wet earth and something faintly sweet, like death left too long in the sun. I remember the sound of his carriage before I saw it, slow, deliberate, the rhythm of wheels over gravel, like a heartbeat that had forgotten mercy. Mary was at the window, her hands still damp from washing. "He's come again," she said, her voice thin as the curtains that fluttered behind her. I told her to stay inside, though we both knew she wouldn't. Mary never trusted me when it came to business. She had the sense to see rot where I still saw fruit. Benton stepped out in a dark coat, his hat low over his eyes. He was a tall man, the kind who carried authority not by force but by certainty. He spoke softly, always softly, as though afraid to wake something sleeping nearby. "Mr. Harper," he said, "the bank is losing patience. You've been granted extensions enough to fill a year. I told him I only needed one more season, that the rains would come." He looked past me toward the field, where the stalks had begun to brown at the tips. "You may pray for rain, sir," he said, "but the Lord don't water debts." That was the moment it began. Not with a threat or a shout, but a silence, a pause that hung too long between two men who knew the same truth. Benton took off his gloves, laid them neatly across his knee, and leaned closer. "There are alternatives," he said. "Not official, you understand. But there are men who take interest in your kind of property." It was then that Mary stepped out onto the porch. Her face was pale, the kind of pale that comes not from fear, but from knowing. She knew what he meant. I saw it in her eyes, the instant of horror, the tightening of her hand around the rail. Benton saw it too. He tipped his hat and said nothing more. He didn't need to. The sin had already been named. That night we sat at the kitchen table, the oil lamp flickering low. The silence between us felt heavier than words. Mary stared at the flame, as though it might burn the thought from her mind. "You won't sell them," she said. Not a question, a command. I said nothing. She turned to me then, her voice breaking. "Elias, they're people. You damn us all." I told her damnation had already found its way through the door, that we were only deciding how much of ourselves it would take. The words came like ash, weightless, but they settled deep. When she left the table, I watched her hands tremble. She was praying, I think, though even her prayers sounded like mourning by then. I could not sleep that night. I walked out into the fields, the moon casting silver across the dying crop. The air was thick, the ground cracked beneath my boots. I could smell the rot, hear the faint hum of insects feeding on what had once been life. I do not know if what happened next was decision or surrender. Benton returned again, and this time he did not come alone. 2 men waited by the carriage, their coats too fine for field work. One of them held a ledger. The other carried a pistol at his hip. Benton spoke little. He only handed me the paper, the pen, and the promise of survival. I signed. My name, my family's name, bound in ink darker than blood. Mary did not speak to me for 3 days. When she finally did, her words were calm, too calm. "You've traded souls for soil," she said. "The earth won't forgive that." I laughed, a hollow sound even then. "The earth has no memory," I told her. But she looked at me as if I were a child. "That's where you're wrong, Elias," she said. "The earth remembers everything. Every footprint, every lie, every bone we bury in it." She was right. The earth remembers, and I would learn that lesson in the years that followed, in ways that tore through flesh and faith alike. Because the man I sold was not just another name in the ledger. He had a family, and one night, when the wind rose through the cane, he came back. It was the night after I signed the paper when the first sound came. Faint at first, like the dragging of something heavy through wet earth. The wind was still, yet the cane shivered as though caught in a storm. I remember sitting by the window, a candle burning low, its flame leaning toward the open air, as if drawn to some unseen breath. Mary had taken to sleeping in the children's room, though none of them would speak to me. The house had become divided, not by walls, but by silence. The following morning I found the back door open. The soil near the steps was disturbed, not by boot or animal, but by hands. Human hands. The prints were deep, desperate, reaching toward the house. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of rain and wind. But the rain hadn't fallen in weeks. Even the crows had stopped coming. 3 days later, Benton's men came to collect what I owed them. They took the youngest first, Thomas. He was 14, pale and sickly from the fever that had swept through our parish the year before. He cried quietly, not because he understood what was happening, but because Mary's screams made the air unbearable. "He'll be fed," Benton said. "He'll work indoors, maybe even learn a trade." He lied with the grace of a preacher. Mary fell to her knees as they carried Thomas away. She clawed at Benton's coat, tore the seam and cursed him, cursed me, with words I had never heard from her before. I tried to speak, but my throat felt full of dust. She looked up at me and said, "You signed him over to men who sell pain." Then she spat at my feet. That night, I dreamed of Thomas. He stood at the edge of the field, the moonlight on his face, the soil clinging to his bare feet. He said nothing, only raised his hand as if to shield his eyes from something too bright to look at. When I woke, the candle had burned itself out, and the house smelled of ash. On the 4th day, the second boy was taken. William, my firstborn. He didn't cry. He just looked at me, his jaw set the way mine used to be, when I still believed a man could control his own fortune. "It's just until the harvest," I told him. He nodded, though I could see the lie had already taken root between us. He left without a word. Mary didn't come out to see him go. She was on the floor in the kitchen, clutching the Bible like a drowning woman holds a plank. That evening, as the sun bled itself out behind the trees, the sky turned the color of rust. I remember walking the field, feeling the soft crunch of dying cane beneath my boots. I wanted to pray, but the words refused to form. Each time I tried, the name Thomas caught in my throat. It wasn't prayer that came out of me. It was guilt, thick and choking. Then somewhere in the distance I heard it again. The dragging. Not in the field this time, but nearer beneath the house. I went to the cellar door with a lantern, though my hand shook so violently the light wavered like breath on glass. The steps creaked as I descended, the smell of damp wood and old soil rising to meet me, and there, at the far corner, I saw footprints. Small ones, the kind a boy would make if he were barefoot and lost. They led to the wall and stopped. I touched the boards where they ended, half expecting to feel warmth or pulse. But the wood was cold, soaked through with moisture that had no source. I spent that night in the chair by the cellar door, too afraid to sleep, too guilty to move. Each hour seemed longer than the last. the ticking clock in the parlor counting out a penance I didn't deserve to finish. Mary did not come to me. The house had grown quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like the silence after lightning. When the air waits to decide whether it will burn. Before dawn, I whispered to no one, "Lord, if this is punishment, let it be only me." But the Lord, if he heard, said nothing. The house remained still. The field outside swayed without wind. By morning, the prints were gone. Yet when I walked through the field, I saw something glinting between the stalks, a brass button, the kind from William's coat. It was half buried in the dirt, as though the earth itself had begun its own ledger of what I'd taken. I still remember that moment, the way the light caught the button, how it seemed to pulse with the same dull gleam as my sin. I bent to pick it up, and when I did, I felt the ground breathe just once. Shallow, like something beneath the surface shifting closer to the air. That was the first time I truly felt afraid. Not of God, not of Benton, but of the earth, because Mary had been right. It remembers, and it had begun to wake. It was after William was gone that the air around the house changed. The sunlight lost its warmth, and even at midday the walls carried a dampness that smelled of the river. Mary no longer spoke to me except through her prayers, low, broken murmurs that slipped beneath the doors and up the stairwell. I would wake to find her kneeling in strange places, by the window, beside the empty bed frames, or once, at the foot of the well. She said she was listening for her sons. I told her the dead did not whisper, but she only looked at me with eyes I could no longer meet. The cane field began to rot from the roots upward. The leaves blackened, brittle to the touch. I thought it was blight at first, but it spread too evenly, as though guided by something deliberate, something that knew the shape of punishment. Benton's men stopped coming by. They said the ground had turned bad, that whatever we'd done here had soured the soil. I said nothing, because I had begun to hear things at night, small things, fragile as breath. The sound of children breathing through the cracks of the floorboards. The whisper of bare feet running across the attic when I knew no one was there. Mary's hair began to turn white. Not from age, from grief. She carried herself like a woman whose soul had slipped into the walls before her body followed. Once she asked me if I still prayed. I said I did, though I had not spoken to God since the day they took Thomas. She smiled, but it wasn't kindness. "Then he's not listening," she said. And in that moment I think I hated her. Not for the words, but because they were true. I spent my evenings by the fire, staring at the brass button I'd found. It had begun to darken, not with rust, but with a thin black film that reminded me of soot. I kept it on the mantel, though I could not explain why. Sometimes in the firelight it looked wet. Sometimes it looked as if it was pulsing, faintly, like something still alive. When the nights grew long, I thought I heard a voice in the crackling wood, small, trembling, asking, "Father, before I go further, if you wish to hear more of these forgotten confessions, stay with me, subscribe, and listen to the rest." One evening the storm came, the kind that seems to build its anger for years before breaking. Rain slammed against the shutters, and the wind howled through the chimneys with a sound like crying. Mary was in her room praying aloud, her words lost to the thunder. I went to the cellar thinking to secure the door, and found water rising through the cracks in the floor. The lantern light flickered across the surface, and I saw it there, a small wooden toy boat floating just above the waterline. It was carved crudely, unevenly, and William's work. I remembered the day he made it, cutting it from a broken chair leg, laughing when it tipped sideways in the basin. But this one was whole. I bent down, trembling, and the air turned colder, heavy with the scent of river mud. Beneath the water, just below where the toy floated, I saw the outline of a hand, pale, motionless, pressed against the boards. I froze. The fingers did not move, but the water rippled once, slow and deliberate. I stumbled back, dropping the lantern. It hissed and died in the flood. For a long moment the dark held me, thick, endless, and alive. When I climbed back upstairs, the house was silent. The storm had eased, but something else had taken its place, a low, rhythmic sound coming from the children's room. I pushed the door open, heart pounding. The beds were empty. The window was open, and on the pillow, where Thomas once slept, lay a handful of wet soil, neatly piled, as though placed there by careful, tiny hands. Mary came to the doorway behind me, her face pale in the moonlight. "They're not gone," she said. Her voice was calm, too calm. "They're waiting for you to finish what you began." That night I did not sleep. The ticking of the clock became unbearable, marking the slow decay of every thought I'd buried. Each tick seemed louder, closer, until it felt as though it came from within my chest. I sat in the parlor until dawn, staring at nothing, whispering their names into the empty air, not in prayer, but in apology. And when the first light broke through the window, I saw them, faint shadows standing in the field, shoulder to shoulder, unmoving. The cane behind them bowed, though the wind was still. I blinked, and they were gone. But the earth where they'd stood was dark, wet and sunken, as if something beneath it had shifted, breathing once more. That morning, Mary packed a small bag. She said she was going to her sister's, though we both knew she'd never reach the road. She walked into the field barefoot, the hem of her dress brushing against the dying stalks. She didn't look back. I haven't seen her since. The button on the mantel cracked that night, and the house began to hum. The sound began like a low murmur, faint at first, something you could mistake for the wind moving through the cane. But it wasn't the wind. It came from beneath the floors, soft and steady, a kind of humming that pulsed through the walls like a heartbeat. The whole house seemed to breathe in rhythm with it. I tried to ignore it, sitting by the hearth, staring at the cold ashes that refused to catch. But the sound followed me even into my sleep. It was in the pipes, the rafters, the walls, even in the space between my ribs. The house, I realized, was not echoing something alive. It was remembering something dead. The neighbors stopped coming after Mary's disappearance. The stories spread faster than any sermon, that the Harpers had called something unholy into their land. Some said she'd drowned herself in the cane fields. Others swore they saw her walking through the fog near the river, her dress trailing mud. I knew better. Whatever had taken her hadn't left. It was still inside the house, humming in the dark, patient as rot. I took to sealing the doors at night, first with boards, then with nails. But every morning one would be open again, swinging gently on its hinges. The soil outside had grown soft, swollen from rain, and I could see faint impressions leading toward the barn. Not footprints exactly, more like the marks left when small hands dragged through mud. I followed them one morning before dawn, carrying a lantern, my breath heavy in the fog. They led to the edge of the field, to a place where the cane bent inward, forming a small hollow in the earth. The soil there was darker than the rest, wet. I knelt down, pressing my hand against it, and it was warm, pulsing faintly like skin. I jerked back, dropping the lantern. The glass cracked, but the flame held, spilling a dim light across the ground. I saw then the faint outline of something just beneath the surface, a small, round shape covered in a thin layer of earth. I brushed at it, trembling. My fingers came away black and slick. The more I dug, the more I saw. Buttons, dozens of them, small and tarnished, scattered like seeds across the soil, all the same shape as the one from William's coat. That night, I burned the cane nearest the house. I told myself it was to purify the ground, to drive away whatever spirit lingered. But as the flames rose, I heard their voices in the crackle, faint and high, like children playing far away. Not screaming, not angry, just calling my name, over and over until the smoke thickened and I fell to my knees. The air tasted of sugar and ash. My skin burned, and through the haze I saw them again, 3 small silhouettes standing in the firelight, watching, not accusing, just waiting. When the fire died, the field was nothing but charred stubble and smoke. The soil still steamed, and I could feel the heat rising through the soles of my boots. I went back inside and found the door open, the humming louder. It was not coming from the walls anymore. It was inside the parlor, inside the floor beneath the hearth. I could feel it vibrating through the chair legs, through my hands, through my teeth. I pressed my ear against the boards. It wasn't humming. It was breathing. I spent the next week in the upstairs room, too afraid to walk the lower floors. I wrote letters to Mary that I never sent, each one shorter than the last, as though the words themselves were rotting. I confessed everything to the page, the sail, the guilt, the sound. But each morning, when I woke, the letters would be gone. Only the candle remained, half melted, its wax spread across the desk like dried tears. I've come to understand something about sin. It does not die when confessed. It takes root, grows beneath the tongue, beneath the skin, beneath the ground. You can burn it, bury it, drown it, and still it breathes. I think now that the debt I owed Benton was never paid in coin or in flesh. It was paid in something deeper, something I cannot name, without losing what little remains of my faith. That night, I opened the cellar door again. The air that came up was heavy and damp, thick with the smell of iron and salt. The lantern flickered in my hand. The steps creaked, each one groaning like an old prayer. When I reached the bottom, I saw it, a small pool where the water had gathered, black and still. In its reflection, I saw faces, faint like light through thin cloth. They were not mine. They were waiting. I dropped to my knees, whispering their names, all 3 of them, one after the other, until my throat went raw. "Forgive me," I said, though I knew forgiveness was not what they wanted. The surface of the water trembled, as though stirred by a breath that was not my own. Then faintly a sound rose from the darkness below, soft, almost tender. A child's voice, "Father, come home." The lantern flickered once, then died, and I realized that the house had never been haunted by the dead. It was haunted by the debt that made them so. I did not sleep after that night. Sleep had become a kind of betrayal, an invitation for the voices to come closer. Each time I closed my eyes, I felt them breathing near the bedpost, 3 faint exhales in rhythm with my own. I began to whisper their names like a prayer, though I knew no prayer could reach the ground they lay in. The house was not mine anymore. It belonged to what we had done, to what I had buried beneath the sugar-cane. By the 3rd morning the walls began to peel. The paint, once a soft cream, now hung in long, curling strips like the dead skin of some creature shedding its memory. The smell of rot had grown unbearable, a sweet, cloying scent that no fire could mask. I moved through the rooms like a stranger trespassing in his own sins. Every photograph, every toy, every faint mark of my sons' lives had begun to fade. I would look at a frame one moment and see their faces, then blink and find only emptiness staring back. The house was forgetting them, piece by piece, as though memory itself could not bear the weight. One afternoon, I walked to the field again. The ground was soft beneath my feet, as if breathing shallowly beneath the topsoil. The charred cane still stood, like blackened ribs against the horizon. The air was thick, unmoving. I heard something, not the voices, not the wind, but the faint sound of humming. The same tune Mary used to sing while washing their clothes by the well. I turned, half expecting her to be there, bent over her bucket, sleeves rolled up. But there was nothing. Only the sound. Only that hollow melody rising from nowhere, circling me like a benediction turned curse. It was then I saw them again, not as figures this time, but as movement in the soil itself. The ground quivered, rippling outward from where the toy boat had once floated in the cellar water. Small shapes pressed against the earth, as though something beneath it were trying to surface. Hands, little hands, pushing upward, straining for air that would never come. I wanted to run, but my knees gave way. I fell forward into the dirt, my palms sinking deep into the soil until I felt the cold touch of something smooth beneath. Bone or stone, I could not tell. The hum grew louder, no longer a tune but a vibration, steady and suffocating, like the tolling of a church bell that would not stop. I tried to speak, to beg forgiveness, but my mouth filled with dirt. It clung to my tongue, heavy and wet. I spat and coughed until I tasted iron. When I looked down again, my hands were black with mud, and between my fingers I could see pale fragments shining through, teeth tiny, pearly white, still perfect after all these years. I remember screaming, though not aloud. The sound never left my throat. It stayed trapped inside me, like everything else I had buried. That night I tried to write again. The ink ran thin, the pen splitting mid-stroke. My words shook on the page. I have become the grave I built. I lit a candle and set the paper beside me, waiting for dawn. The flame flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the parlor. In the light, I saw my reflection in the window pane. But it was not my face that stared back, it was theirs. 3 faint outlines behind the glass, mouths moving, eyes hollow as unfilled graves. I could not hear their words, but I could feel them, deep beneath the ribs, where guilt grows into something alive. For the first time in decades, I knelt. My knees cracked against the boards and I began to pray. The words felt strange in my mouth, brittle, forgotten. I asked for mercy, but it came out as a plea for silence. "Please," I said, "let me rest." But the air was thick, unmoving. The candlelight trembled, and I knew the answer would not come from heaven. It would come from beneath. The boards creaked behind me. I turned, expecting emptiness. But the chair by the hearth was rocking, slowly back and forth, though no one sat in it. The old brass button lay on the mantel, glinting faintly in the candlelight. I could swear it was cleaner now, the blackness scrubbed away. It looked as it once did, bright, new, untouched, as if someone had polished it carefully, with small, deliberate hands. I whispered their names again, all 3, and the rocking stopped. The air turned still. The hum beneath the floor quieted. For a moment I thought it was over. But then the chair shifted once more, and I realized the movement was not rocking this time. It was breathing. The candle went out, and I understood that the line between forgiveness and punishment had long vanished. The Lord had not abandoned me. He had simply left me to my own reflection. The house, the field, the soil, all of it had become the scripture of my sin. And I, the last verse yet to fade. The dawn did not come that morning. Or perhaps it did, and the house refused to see it. I woke, if waking can be called that, to the sound of the chair still moving, though slower now, as though it had grown tired of its own persistence. The brass button on the mantel gleamed faintly in the grey air. The walls no longer looked like walls. They seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with every whisper of the house's unseen lungs. I could not tell if I was inside the home, or inside something that had taken its shape. I walked toward the mirror in the hallway. The tall, gilt-framed one Mary had always covered with cloth after funerals. Its cloth was gone now. My reflection stood there, but it was not me, or not entirely me. My face was younger, but streaked with mud. My hands were wet, fingers trembling as if from cold water. Behind my reflection in the dimness, 3 shapes lingered. Not boys anymore, but silhouettes of what the ground had done to them. Their heads tilted slightly, their mouths open as if to speak, yet no sound came. I touched the glass and it rippled like pond water. For a moment, I felt the coldness of their breath on my fingertips. The sound of the river outside grew louder, though there was no river within miles of this plantation. The whisper came next. Not from the walls this time, but from within me. "You kept them from the fire," it said, "but not from the earth." I stumbled back. My knees hit the floorboards. I remembered everything at once. The night the cane fields burned, the way the sky turned copper and the air smelled of ash and flesh. I remembered carrying them one by one to the edge of the water barrel, washing the soot from their hair before laying them in the trench. I told myself it was mercy. I told myself they should rest close to home. But now I knew it had been cowardice, the hope that by hiding them I could hide from the eyes of God. The whisper returned, closer. "They asked for light, Father. You gave them dark." I looked toward the parlor, where the candle had gone out hours ago. But now a faint glow pulsed there, not a flame, but something dull and red, like the inside of a dying ember. It moved, slowly, then all at once, crawling up the wall until it took the shape of a small handprint, black against the light. Then another, and another, until the walls were covered with them, reaching, clutching, pulling inward. The entire room seemed to tighten, as though the house itself were trying to draw breath through its own decay. I began to laugh, quietly at first, then harder, until my ribs ached. It was the kind of laughter that feels like sobbing turned inside out. I spoke aloud to the empty air. "If this is penance, then let it be endless." The house answered, with the creak of footsteps descending from the upstairs hall. Slow, careful, measured. 3 of them. I turned toward the stairs. The top step was empty. Then came the sound again. Another step, then another. The air thickened with a smell I knew too well. Wet soil, burnt wood, and faint traces of candle wax. My heart pounded like a drum in an empty church. "Come," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "If you are here, then let me see you as you were." The footsteps stopped. The silence stretched, heavy as the air before a storm. Then from the corner of the stairwell a small voice, faint, cracked, familiar, said, "We were here, Father. You just stopped looking." I fell to my knees again. My vision blurred, not from tears but from something else. A strange brightness gathering behind my eyes, pressing outward. The walls pulsed once more, then stilled. I reached for the stair railing, trembling, and when my fingers brushed it, it felt warm, alive. There they stood, 3 shapes, pale and flickering in the dim light, like the memory of candle flames before they vanish. Not children, not spirits, but something in between. Fragments of mercy, fragments of guilt. The eldest smiled, or tried to. "We waited," he said softly. "We waited for you to dig us out." I reached forward. My hand passed through him like smoke. His eyes, hollow, endless, seemed almost forgiving. Then they turned toward the parlor, where the red glow had begun to fade. "It's not too late," the smallest one whispered, and I understood then what they wanted. Not prayer, not remembrance, but release. The earth would not keep them, nor would this house. It had to end the way all sins end, with fire. I rose, dizzy but certain, and went to the kitchen. The kerosene can was still there, half full, waiting like an unspoken confession. As I carried it toward the parlor, the air grew still, peaceful almost. The chair no longer rocked. The whispering stopped. The house seemed to listen. When I struck the match, I did not look away. The flame caught quickly, crawling up the drapes, kissing the ceiling beams, feeding on the air that had carried so much silence. The boys did not scream. They only watched, their faces fading with the smoke. their eyes bright for the first time. As the fire reached the walls, I felt something loosen within me, a tether snapping, a soul unfastening itself from the weight of its own memory. The fire did not roar. It sighed, like something long imprisoned drawing its first and final breath. I stood in the doorway, the kerosene can empty in my hand, and watched the flames crawl through the parlor like slow-moving light. They licked the edges of the portraits, the prayer books, the curtains that once caught the morning sun. Each thing took its turn surrendering, as if the house itself understood what I meant to do. The heat pressed against my face, and for a moment it felt almost gentle. The boys' shapes had vanished. What remained was warmth, not ghostly, not cruel, but warm, like the embrace of memory finally freed. I felt it in my chest, that strange mingling of ache and relief, as though I had been both executioner and mourner to my own blood. The smoke rose in slow spirals, carrying their silence upward, and I thought perhaps heaven would know them by that silence, not by their names, but by the weight of what I never said. I moved deeper into the room. The air shimmered thick and golden, and I could almost hear the hymns Mary used to hum when she cleaned the pews. "There is a fountain filled with blood," she'd sing, and I would tell her to stop. But now I mouthed the words, not out of faith but remembrance. I no longer believed in salvation, only in the mercy of burning away what memory refuses to forget. The flames reached the crossbeam above me. A crack echoed, a sound like bone breaking under truth. I did not flinch. I thought of the last sermon I ever gave, the one where I told the congregation that sin leaves no stain fire cannot cleanse. I had meant it as metaphor then. Tonight it was gospel. The house began to sway, slow at first, then heavier, timbers groaning as though burdened by the same guilt that had carried me these long years. I stepped over the threshold into the hallway, where the old mirror still hung. Its glass was cracked now, the surface veined with heat. My reflection trembled inside it, pale, hollow, with eyes too tired to lie. Behind me, the flames crawled closer, painting everything in an amber that felt older than the sun. Before I go further, I whispered to no one, my voice rasping through smoke. If there are still those who listen to these forgotten confessions, stay and hear the rest. The words left me like a final sermon, soft and without conviction. I'd long ago stopped expecting forgiveness. I only hoped the telling would matter, that someone might hear and choose differently, that the sins of fathers might for once die with them. The floor groaned. I could feel the boards weakening under my weight. Through the haze, the portraits of my ancestors seemed to melt, their eyes running like wet ink. How proud they had been, the Harpers of Mississippi, men who measured worth in land and sons, as though God himself kept ledger books. I had thought myself better, but the fire told the truth. We were all accountants of sin, paying debts in blood and silence. I reached for Mary's chair. Its paint blistered under my palm, but I didn't let go. The fabric was blackened, yet I could still trace the outline of where she used to sit. Hands folded, lips moving in prayer, even when her faith had gone dry. I thought of the night she left me, not in anger but in sorrow. "You traded them for peace," she had said, "and you'll never find it." The ceiling cracked again. Embers fell like red snow, drifting onto my shoulders. I walked toward the front door, though I knew I wouldn't cross it. Outside, the rain had begun, soft and steady, hissing as it met the fire. The sound was beautiful, a hymn between flame and water, like the world itself was singing me out. I could barely see now. The smoke hung thick, turning the world into memory. My lungs burned, but I kept speaking, though no one was there to hear. I have nothing left to leave behind, no sons, no name worth keeping. Let this house be our tomb, and let the wind scatter what it must. The fire answered with a single deep groan. The roof above me sagged, then split, a rush of sparks flaring upward like wings. For a heartbeat I thought I saw them again, the three boys, standing in the light, watching. No reproach, no sorrow, only stillness. I took a step forward, and the floor caved beneath me. The world became light and falling. 1,000 memories unraveling at once. The smell of river mud, Mary's laughter, the echo of the church bell that never rang again. All of it dissolving into heat. Somewhere in the blur of it, I heard my father's voice, deep, steady, the way he sounded when I was a child. "A man pays his debts, son," he said. "One way or another." I wanted to answer, but there was no breath left to form the words. Only fire, and the sound of the house settling into its final prayer. When the floor met me, it did not hurt. It felt like sleep. I awoke to no pain, only weight, the heavy, muffled weight of earth above me and the faint whisper of rain somewhere far beyond. The fire had passed. What remained was the color of ash and bone. I could not tell if I still breathed or if the breath had left and refused to notice. Everything around me was quiet, not the silence of peace, but the kind that follows a great noise, when the world itself seems afraid to move. I thought I had burned with the house. Perhaps I had. Yet here I was, somewhere between its memory and its ruin. The walls no longer stood, but I could still sense them. The shape of each room traced in the dark, every nail and splinter remembered by touch rather than sight. I heard the echoes of footsteps, my own from another time, pacing the hallway, the creak of the floorboards beneath a younger man's guilt. The air was thick with the smell of soot and old prayers. I reached out, and my hand passed through dust that might once have been wood, or paper, or bone. Somewhere nearby a sound, faint, rhythmic, like a clock half buried in cinders. Tick, tick, tick. Time, it seemed, had refused to die with me. I followed it, or perhaps it followed me, until I came upon the remnants of the parlor. The old clock lay face down among the ashes, its glass shattered, its hands still moving though the gears had long since melted. I stared at it for what could have been minutes or years. Its stubborn pulse mocked me, as though time wished to remind me that even ruin must keep count. In that dim, half-real light, the boys appeared again. They were not aflame nor spectral, just as I remembered them, barefoot, solemn, eyes too old for their years. They did not speak, and I did not dare to. They only looked at me, the way children look when they already understand too much. And then, one by one, they turned toward the open door, where the night wind moved like a whisper. I followed them outside. The rain had cleansed everything. Where once stood the Harper house, now lay a blackened field, glistening beneath a bruised sky. The cane was gone, the trees were gone. Only the stone well remained, cracked and steaming faintly, as if even the earth tried to forget. The boys stopped at its edge. The oldest, Thomas, turned to me. I hadn't heard his voice since that last evening by the hearth, when he asked if I still prayed. Now he only said, "It's finished." I wanted to ask, "Finished what?" But the words failed. I looked down into the well. It was no longer dark water that stared back, but reflection. My own face, younger, dressed in a minister's coat, standing proud before the church door. Around that reflection, faint ripples spread outward, revealing other moments. Mary's trembling hands when she learned what I'd done, the debt collector's ink-black smile, the moment I signed away my son's names on a ledger meant for cotton and cattle. Each memory shimmered like oil upon water, ugly, iridescent, undeniable. My throat tightened. Was it all for nothing? I asked the reflection. It did not answer. But in the next ripple, I saw the boys again. Older now, working, bleeding, breaking in fields not their own. Their backs bent, their eyes hollow, yet they endured. They endured longer than I ever had. I felt my knees weaken, the ash beneath me soft like old cloth. The wind carried Mary's voice through the ruins. "You can't buy peace, Samuel. You only borrow it until the truth comes calling." I turned, but she was nowhere. Only the faint outline of her chair, what little remained, and the smell of rain on smouldering earth. I sank to the ground beside the well, my palms pressing into wet ash. The warmth beneath it pulsed faintly, like a dying heart. I realized it was my own. It had burned so long that the fire had learned my rhythm. The boys stood behind me now, silent, patient, waiting for something I had yet to give. I wanted to weep, but there was nothing left inside to spill. Only the slow, exhausted acceptance of a man who finally understood the measure of his sins. The night pressed closer. The rain fell harder. I could feel the weight of time folding inward, years collapsing into seconds, faces into shadows. I whispered one last prayer, not to God, but to the silence that had carried me this far. If there is still a world beyond this, let them rest. "Take me instead," the well answered with a hollow echo, the sound of something deep and unending. The boys turned once more, their shapes fading into the grey until only the rain remained. I stayed there beside the well, my hand still trembling over the ashes, listening to the last heartbeat of the house that once carried my name. And in that rhythm, faint, uneven, yet steady, I finally heard it, the sound of debt being paid, not in coin, not in blood, but in remembrance. It is morning now, or what the soul calls morning, though no sun rises where I lie. The air tastes of soot and iron. Somewhere far above the crows are calling again, though I cannot see them. Their cries sound like the echoes of church bells buried under water, distant, warped, and without mercy. I have not moved from the place beside the well. My hands are blackened to the wrist, and when I lift them, small flakes of ash drift away like grey snow. The world feels thinner than it once did, as though I could reach through it and touch the memory beneath. I'm not sure what remains of me, whether these words come from flesh or from something that refused to die with it. The field is quiet. Even the wind has grown tired of my voice. I think of the sermons I once gave, the pride with which I spoke of faith and salvation, the way I told men that confession cleansed the heart. How easy it is to preach from the pulpit when your sins are still asleep. How different when they wake beside you, wearing the faces of your own blood. I tried to build a life from obedience, to believe that struggle was holiness in disguise. But the truth was simpler and far crueler. I feared hunger more than I feared hell. And so I sold what no father should, and prayed that God would forgive a bargain he never sanctioned. I called it necessity. I called it sacrifice. But sin by any gentler name still poisons the same well. I can no longer remember their voices clearly, my sons, my Mary. Only the weight of them remains, like stones tied to a soul that cannot sink. I see shapes when I close my eyes. Thomas with his quiet strength, Joseph's thin shoulders bent in labor, Elijah's face, too young to understand the price I paid. I see Mary at the door the day I told her, her lips trembling but no tears falling. She did not curse me. She simply turned away. That silence has followed me longer than any sermon ever could. If there is mercy left in the world, I do not ask for it. I've lived too long in the shadow of what I built, and burned too long in its light. Yet I confess this not for pardon, but for truth, that some sins are not forgiven by God or man, but only by time's slow forgetting. Still I am not forgotten. I feel it in the weight of the air, in the hush between each raindrop. The land remembers, the house remembers. Even the ashes whisper before I go further. If you wish to hear more of these forgotten confessions, stay with me. Subscribe and listen to the rest. I do not know who you are, nor why you would listen to an old man's ruin. But if you have come this far, then perhaps guilt has led you here too. Perhaps you know the sound of something you loved breaking quietly inside you, and you call it faith, because the truth hurts more. There was a time I believed the Lord counted every hair on our heads. Now I think he counts only our silences, and mine have been too many. Every night I kept still when I should have spoken. Every day I let my debts grow into ghosts. I've learned that the cruelest judgment is memory itself. It does not strike like lightning. It seeps, slow and faithful, until even the strongest walls collapse from within. The rain has stopped. The ground steams faintly, and the last of the smoke rises in thin grey lines toward a sky that no longer notices us. My voice feels distant, as if it travels through another man's mouth. I'm not certain these words still belong to me. Perhaps they never did. Perhaps confession is only the echo of what was lost, speaking to itself in the dark. I lay my hand upon the earth where my sons were taken, and I whisper their names one last time, not as a plea, but as an apology. The soil trembles beneath my touch, alive with roots that will outlive the name Harper and all the sins it carried. Somewhere deep below, the water still moves, slow and black, turning the ashes of my house into something softer. Maybe even forgiveness. The crows have gone quiet now. The field is still. I feel my heartbeat flicker, not stopping, only fading, like the last candle in a church long abandoned. I've said all that must be said. The rest belongs to the silence. If anyone finds these words, tell them I tried, not to be good, but to remember. And if God is still listening, tell him the debt is paid. Tell him